Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid, the most successful, the most popular homesteading channel on the entire internet that has nothing to do with homesteading. Get my 6 takes on a very special meaning today. It's a military term, which means watch my back. A lot of people in the comments section always ask, what's that mean? Now, I say it here on the channel because we never know what we may or may not see back here, him, her, it, or they. So keep your eyes open for that. But once upon a time, it meant, hey, buddy, you make sure I come back to base tonight alive, and I'll make sure you do the same. And that's when I was over in Iraq in 08 and 09. And I'm blessed to have made it home. Today, as of this recording and the uploading of this video, it's Memorial Day, and not everybody made it home. So I want everybody to take a moment to remember the fallen, those who gave the ultimate sacrifice in service to country. Right or wrong, whether we were there for good reasons or bad, no matter what the conflict was, the war I was in, previous wars before that, the men and the women who were there went so that those who didn't have to, and not all of them came home. So politics aside, there's no greater sacrifice than that. I want to thank all the veterans out there. I want to thank all the active duty military personnel, the reservists, the guardsmen, guardswomen. Coast Guard is always left out. They shouldn't be. I'll tell you, we were down in Tybee Island, Georgia, back in April, and I'd see those Coast Guard helicopters fly over. Nothing made me feel safer. So, I got a story for you today. I'm going to read you a story that's very fitting for the occasion, for the holiday, Memorial Day, even though it comes from a book written for Halloween. Some of you have heard this story. It's a story called Riding with Private Lopez, but there are about 50,000 of you on the channel now that weren't here last Halloween, last October when I read this book, so it'll be a treat for you. This weekend, this Memorial Day weekend, my beautiful bride Dearly, aka Giggly Girl, and myself and our son Daniel, we went down to Virginia Beach and spent a night at the Virginia Beach KOA in our tent. We camped. It rained. We had hoped to get some beach time, but we didn't. There were some warnings, riptide warnings, so we couldn't get in the water. We didn't mind, though, but we didn't get wet. Our tent's waterproof. But while we were there, we also went to a concert in Norfolk on Friday night at the Scope Center. The headliner was Sam Hunt. Okay, many of you know Sam Hunt. He's awesome. Now, I guess he's like country rock. He's one of those country artists that was able to kind of transition over into mainstream pop and rock. He was popular across many genres because his music is kind of, I mean, it's kind of like some rap, some southern rock. But there were 3 artists that opened up for him, and I'd never really listened to these folks, but they did an amazing job. There's a beautiful young woman named Tracy Lynn, who was from the Hampton Roads, Virginia area originally. She's down in Nashville now. Drew Green, and opening up just before Sam Hunt was a guy named Jordan Davis, who gave just as an amazing performance as Sam Hunt himself. Maybe he might have outshined Sam a little bit. No offense to Sam Hunt, just that Jordan Davis guy was amazing. Now, I kind of had like a reawakening, and this is what I mean by this. Before I went off to Iraq in 08 and 09, I listened to country music. I listened to pop. I listened to rock. I grew up with rock, 80s rock, hair metal type stuff. I like multiple genres. But after I got back from Iraq and then 6 months in the Army hospital, I spent nearly 6 years in Southeast Asia in the Philippines. That's where I met my beautiful bride. And our son was born, and we didn't come back until 3 months before he started kindergarten. This was Eastern culture. I got away from American pop culture. I no longer listen to country music. They don't listen to it over there. Now, you say, well, couldn't you have listened to it on the internet and YouTube? Well, that wasn't the life we were living. We were in the jungle for many years without electricity, without running water. I got away from football. I was always a big football fan. I was a sports editor for my college paper. So when I came back, I didn't really get back into those things. And the main reason why is because it occurred to me how much time I was giving up for those things. And it's time that I now feel I use in a more useful manner. Writing, reading, spending time with my family. We've gone camping almost every weekend since the beginning of April. We've been down to Georgia, Savannah. We've gone to Cape Charles on the eastern shore of Virginia, the beach. We've gone to 3 concerts this spring, Journey. We're seeing Bryan Adams here in a couple weeks. We're living life to the fullest. And it goes back to a promise I made myself while riding across the Arabian desert one night while out on mission in Iraq. We're about a month away from getting home. And that's kind of the 2 scariest parts are your first month there because it's all new, if you've never deployed, and then your last month there, because in that last month, you start thinking, wow, I've made it this far. What if I don't make it the rest of the way? And they're coming at you. They don't want you to go home. So I made myself a promise that if I do make it home, I'm going to live the life that I want to live. And it's going to rain on me. And I'm going to sit here in the rain and tell these stories in the rain. I'm no longer going to do things that I don't want to do simply because other people think I should do them. I lived my life up until I was almost 40 doing what I felt others wanted me to do, for them to accept me, and it's what you call conditional love. I was raised on conditional love. I never knew anything but conditional love till I met my beautiful bride, Dearly, a.k.a. Giggly Girl. Her and my son gave me unconditional love for the first time I've ever known in my life. And I've said it before on the channel. It's been a while because I don't really do videos like this anymore. They loved me back to life. I was down and out in the Philippines, and I didn't expect to come home. I never expected to see this beautiful country again, but I have because of the love that they gave me. So there's another thing I promised myself, and I'm doing that today after I read the book. I always wanted to be a pumpkin farmer. It's just a crazy idea. I love Halloween, so on Memorial Day, that's my thing. I always plant my pumpkins on Memorial Day. But to mine own self, I have been true. That's why we do the things we do. We don't sit around idle, melting into the couch on the weekends, not leaving the house. We go out and we do stuff. We live. And I do it in honor of my battle buddies that didn't make it home, who don't have that choice. I do it in honor of those who did make it home but lost the war at home and chose to take their own lives. 21 veterans a day do that, and it's sad. I was close. You've heard those stories if you've been on this channel for a while. I'm not there today because I have 2 people in my life who love me unconditionally and keep me from even considering making those choices. So, this is one of the things I was reminded of, and that's just a water droplet. That's not him, her, it, or they. Forgive me if I kind of screw up the rhythm of this video, but I got to get that raindrop off of there. So I kind of got back into football for 2 reasons. Number one, we live just outside of Charlottesville, and we go to watch all the UVA football games because that's part of living life to its fullest. I'm not a UVA alumnus. I graduated from a state college in West by God, Virginia that nobody's ever heard of. But I support the home team, and going to those games give my family and I something to do on the weekends in the fall that we really enjoy. And we've gotten to know a lot of people. We made friends by doing that. And my son, who's now in middle school, we got here 3 months before he started kindergarten because I wanted him to be educated in the U.S. so that he would have every opportunity anybody else would ever have. Now, if he wants to go back to the Philippines and live there full time, and we're going to go back and forth, my wife and I, once we're done, raising him here, and they've been back a couple times, and we might go back this summer, maybe next summer, but just for a few months. But I wanted him not to be held back by having a third world education. I wanted him to have the best. And if you don't think we have the best here, go spend time in some third world countries, not on the resorts with other tourists, but in the communities, and stay for a long time, stay for years, and then come back and we'll compare notes. And this brings me to my other point, my other reawakening. But I got to point this out for my son and his team. I got back into football also because I coach his flag football team. I've been doing that for several years now, coaching his basketball team. And we have this group of kids, an amazing group of kids who a couple of years ago when this was new, they gave us what I would call the leftovers. All the kids who had never played an organized sport before. So we were playing against teams who had been playing together for years, some of them 5 years. Me and the head coach, I'm an assistant, we literally had to set up a non-mandatory second practice during the week so kids could come voluntarily if they wanted to, if their parents would bring them, so we could teach them how to throw and catch a football because these kids had never played any sport and many of them didn't know how to throw or catch. We didn't win a single game that first season, okay? The next season, we won one game, and that game was like the Super Bowl for us. Our season just ended last week. We won our championship. Yeah. And we beat a team that over the past couple of years had beaten us 3 times. We'd never beaten them. In that championship final game, we beat them 40-12. Our kids showed up to win. They did everything right. And this is nothing against the other team. They played great. They played just as well as they had the previous 3 times we played them when they beat us. It was our day. It was our day. And that was such a good feeling. But now, I never got back into country music, or I listen to music on YouTube. Mostly what I listen to is I'll play instrumental music, soft instrumental music to play in the background throughout the day while I'm working, while I'm writing. Keeps me calm, keeps my brain from racing. But when I sat there in that concert and I heard these people singing, I thought, why have I not gotten back into this? I have missed this. They were singing about what's important. Especially Jordan Davis. He has a song called Buy Dirt. And I know a lot of you are probably going crazy. I love that song. I listened to that song in the tent before we went to the concert because I wanted to have an idea of what this guy was about. Man, it hit me in the soul, man. Because it's everything I believe in. It's the way we live. Buy dirt, which means, get out and get a piece of land. Find a good woman, which I have endearly. I have the best. Have a family. It's talking about adding some forks to your family tree, watching the pencil lines and the grass outside grow. And there's a line in there that says, do something that you love and call it work. It doesn't say get a good job. It doesn't say enter a profession that your parents will be approving of. It says do something you love and call it work. That's what I do. I mean, that and content creation, there's this arrogant term people that do what I do call themselves. They call it influencers. I am not an influencer. I do not refer to myself as an influencer. I tell stories. I tell jokes. I talk about past experiences in my life, talk about tough times I've been through, hope maybe that can get other people through tough times. But influencer, I am a social media content creator. And the beauty of that is that when things go south, as they did with this channel towards the tail end of last year, because I wouldn't e-bag, and so I was no longer featured, I just went over to a different platform, i.e. Facebook, and started doing something different, telling jokes over there. Now our Sick Twisted Humor page has over 640,000 followers. And thank you for those of you who have come on board over there. The Homesteading Off the Grid Facebook page has 50-some, almost 60,000. And then, of course, we got 310,000 here. Combined, we now have over 1 million followers and subscribers. And it's because I've done something I love. Sure, society wants me to have a job. People say I should work. Well, this is my work. I do what I love and I call it work. Just like that song, Buy Dirt by Jordan Davis says. Another thing that happened at that concert, I live in Charlottesville. I mentioned that, right outside of Charlottesville. If you declare love of country in my area, they'll call you a nationalist. So much of mainstream society, if you love America and you claim this is the greatest country on earth, you will be condemned as a nationalist. Not at that concert. There were chants of USA, USA. And in between acts, there was an MC that would come out and introduce veterans. Some still active members still serving. Some of the veterans were disabled, but they'd gone off and they'd started side projects to support other disabled veterans. Many of them were working with rescue animals. They were showcasing the amazing things these people have done to continue to serve their country even after their time in service. And the MC was talking about how great America is. My son turned to me and said, Dad, I haven't heard this many people talking about how great America is since we left the Philippines. Now think about that for a minute. I'm going to explain exactly what that means. All he heard in the Philippines was people talking about how great America is and how much they would love to come here because they know what opportunities are presented here. And it occurred to me when my son said that, I said, I haven't either. And it was amazing. It was wonderful. They were singing about the love of going fishing, going out and chasing that big buck, raising that family on your little piece of dirt. it's like, how did I stay away from this? Well, I got to get on with the story because it's a good one. It's appropriate for the day. I've gotten back into it, man. I've been sitting around today listening to Sam Hunt and Jordan Davis, and we're going to have to add a few more country rock concerts to our agenda going forward as we're out there living life to the fullest, because I was blessed enough to make it back from the sandbox. I am blessed today to have a woman that loves me and a son that loves me unconditionally. I love them back unconditionally. We have our health. We have prosperity, because we have a million of you folks who have stopped by, some of you often, some of you not so much, to listen to these stories, to watch the goofy things I do in the woods sometimes, to point out where him, her, it, or they might be moving around in the background, and to listen to a 60-second joke and give it a thumbs up and share it and come back for more. Thank you. You're one of many reasons why I'm blessed. Now, with no further ado, as Dearly would say, and by the way, she is applying for her U.S. citizenship, and she's excited about that. And she's already saying that the greatest day in her life will be when she is sworn in as a U.S. citizen. If you think it sucks here that bad, go live in a third world country for a while. Again, not on a resort, but in the communities with the folks, and they're wonderful folks. But go find out what it feels like not to know where your next meal's coming from, and to not have a safety net there that you can just go to and be provided for, and then come back in a few years and let's compare notes, okay? I wouldn't have qualified as a sharpshooter and been a machine gunner today like I did back in the day. So this is a story. This comes from October Nights, Part 2, 31 More Tales for the Halloween season. All my books are available on Amazon in print and Kindle. You can get autographed versions of some of them from our Etsy store. The link to both places is in the description, or the links are in the description box below. But this one comes from October 23. These books are designed so that, the October Night books are designed so that every night throughout the month of October, you've got a different spooky, creepy, scary story to read for the build-up, of course, on Halloween. Riding with Private Lopez. I joined the Army later in life than most who have served. I was in my mid-30s. It's not that it had necessarily been by design, it's just that happened to be the time in my life when some low-down, good-for-nothing dirtbags decided to hijack a bunch of our planes and fly them through a bunch of our buildings, and in so doing, kill a bunch of our people. I'd been a stockbroker before joining the Army, and despite everyone I knew telling me I was crazy to walk away from such a lucrative career, again, later in life, and sign up to go off and get killed, as most of them put it, I cannot remember being so on fire to do something like that, which I was about to do, join the military because we'd been attacked, at any other point in my life, other than during the peak of my competitive athletic career. My desire to do this military thing stirred up all the old feelings from those days, the way I'd felt so driven, the desire and will to train like a beast, to compete like a champion. These feelings are how I knew I was doing the right thing, despite what everyone around me was saying. I wasn't concerned with the physical aspects of my upcoming endeavor. As I just alluded to, I'd been a collegiate level distance runner, and I'd stayed fit despite aging throughout the years. I never wanted to be that middle-aged guy who talked about the glory days, those days ending after college, while sitting back all fat and nasty, chugging beers and slurping on chili dogs and pizza. Today, while writing this, and as a near 50-year-old man, what I'll tell you is that 33-year-old me that signed up for the military all those years ago would be hard-pressed to beat this me, the nearly 50-year-old me, in a foot race today, because I still have it, and this is because I still get out there every morning and do the work to keep it. I'm living proof, and proud to be so, that you do not stop playing because you get old. You get old because you stop playing. Challenging as it was, basic training down at Fort Benning, Georgia, I'd enlisted in the infantry, hoorah, wasn't nearly as challenging as much of what I'd already experienced in real life, especially in young adulthood, trying to take care of a family and pay bills, etc. But it was challenging nonetheless. I made new friends and learned way more about the military than I ever thought there was to know, and I came out prepared to fight the good fight over there, the proof of that being that I did so, successfully, having served a combat tour of duty in Mosul, Iraq. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, because it was in Mosul where things get weird. Nay, where things get... Well, I'll simply tell the story and let you decide what it was exactly that happened over there, if you can. While at basic training, I was tasked with many leadership roles. This didn't surprise me because I was older than every guy in my platoon except one, and he was what we call in the military a broke dick. He had a ton of faulty physical conditions, and frankly, the only way I can figure he was even able to get into the military was because they'd lowered the enlistment standards enough to allow guys like him in because we were at war. And all the types who'd historically joined the Guard for free college wanted nothing to do with that free college now that it actually required combat duty. Hence, enlistment numbers were way down, and they had to do something to get them back up. So I suppose lowering the enlistment standards was the easiest way they saw of doing that. My summation of this guy would prove correct, as when his unit did deploy after we'd finished basic training, he wiggled out of it due to health reasons, and he was eventually med-boarded, that means medically discharged, and now draws a tax-free check for life. 2 actually, one from the Army and one from the VA. I'm sure he gets Social Security disability too. He's probably getting 3. There were a few guys just a little younger than me, about 5 of them, and the half dozen of us were pulled aside by our drill sergeant early on and tasked with the duty of being big brotherly to the kids who were away from home for the first time. Many of these new, soon-to-be soldiers had never been camping or even hiking in the woods. Heck, some of them were from the inner cities and had never been out in the country. They were completely a bunch of fish out of water down at Fort Benning, which, if you didn't know, is out in the middle of nowhere in the middle of Georgia. It's about as country as you can get. One man, Private Lopez, a 20-year-old Latino guy who looked 16, standing only 5 feet 6 and weighing maybe 130 pounds, and in possession of the proverbial baby face, stood out among these young men, not just because he was from the inner city, which he was, L.A. to be exact, nor because he'd never spent time in the great outdoors, which he hadn't. He stood out because he was what we call in the military a shitbag, and I know this goes with no explanation being necessary. Sure, Private Lopez had been away from home before, several times actually, if you count up the numerous times he'd been sent away to boys' homes while an adolescent, and if you added in the number of jail stints he'd already pulled after he'd turned 18 a whopping 24 months prior, he'd been away from home a lot. Lopez was that one guy in every unit that everyone else in the unit learned to hate quickly because he was always screwing up, and in basic training and in regular units past basic training, when one screws up, everyone pays the price by way of group punishment. Sure, they deemed group punishment to be unfair and therefore discarded it in the public schools years ago, but the military knows it's effective and they still very much use it today. Private Lopez allowed us all to come to that understanding loud and clear. At first, we cut Lopez a lot of slack. We just saw it as if he was out of his element. He wasn't athletic at all. He'd come from an environment where discipline and structure were not the norm. Cutting him breaks soon ended, as we saw that he simply didn't give a shit. When he'd get in trouble for whatever infraction he'd committed, whether it was not being able to keep up in a physical challenge or for being habitually late for formations, our patience gave out. You guys know what you need to do with Lopez, don't you? One of the drill instructors asked me, and one of the other guys who'd been placed in a leadership position in our platoon, another old guy, as our drill instructors referred to us, even though this other old guy was only 25 years old. "What's that, drill sergeant?" I asked. "Break his fucking arms." "Are you serious?" I said. "If this motherfucker goes off to combat, he's going to get his entire platoon killed. You guys can save a lot of lives and a lot of injuries by breaking his arms. It'll be enough to send him home. We'll med board him." We were on our first bivouac, which is a fancy military term for camping trips. We were about halfway through our 14-week cycle. "We can't do that," the other old guy by my side said. "The hell we can't," Specialist Bird said, pulling up beside us and speaking in a hushed tone. Bird was another old guy, all of 26, and he'd been eavesdropping on the conversation. Bird was a stocky white guy who stood at about 5 feet 8, and he always looked pissed off. I was never able to determine if he really was or if his face just looked that way. "I'm in the same state guard unit as him," Bird said. "He's not getting me killed. Don't worry, Drill Sergeant," he said, looking at our instructor. "I'll break his fucking arms." Drill Sergeant Nameless gave us all a stern look and then turned and walked away. I'm choosing not to name him here so as not to incriminate him, but trust me, what he was asking us to do is common, and worse, is often asked while in combat. It's why they've changed the term friendly fire to fratricide, which means to murder my brother. Because the military powers that be decided to stop turning a blind eye to it and acting like it is accidental. Trust me, most incidences of fratricide are intentional, very methodically planned out, and there's nothing friendly about any of it. And before you start that "I could never" shit, let me tell you, I used to say the same thing, But until you are in combat and people are being killed all around you, and you know it's either you or the rest of your unit or that piece of shit lieutenant who's all about command and bragging to his ROTC buddies from back in college about how he keeps his listed men in line, you may find yourself willing to do all kinds of things you never thought you'd do. Much conversation took place among us old guys for the rest of that day before darkness fell. Half of the old guys wanted to break Lopez's arms and the other half didn't. Had it been simply for the sake of getting rid of him and ridding ourselves of the constant group punishment he brought upon us, we would have never considered it. We'd been playing the basic training game long enough to know that no matter how right you are always wrong. No matter how good you are, you suck. And if Lopez were to be sent home for breaking his arms by running into a door, quote, there would be just someone else for whom we would constantly end up being group punished. However, the drill sergeant had upped the ante by bringing up the cold hard fact that shitbags like Lopez, soldiers who did not take the mission seriously or who were constantly letting their guard down and goofing off, did end up getting people killed in combat. We pulled our thoughts, our ideas, and our wise experience as a bunch of old guys who were nowhere near old, and we came up with a plan. That night, as Lopez was in the middle of his fire guard duty, somewhere around 2:30 a.m. or so, we approached him as a group. "Come at me, brah! I'll stab a motherfucker, brah!" Lopez said. He was holding up a prison shank he'd carved out of a piece of wood with his Leatherman. He obviously knew we were coming. I don't think he caught word of it. I think his instinct simply informed him. He'd been a shitbag for far too long, and he knew it. "Drop that shit," Bird said, knocking the shank out of Lopez's hand. "I'll fight you all," Lopez said, getting into a fighting stance. "You all might get me, brah, but whoever comes first is going to get it, brah." He took a couple of swings, not really aiming at anyone, and we saw tears running down his face in the moonlight. Private Lopez was scared shitless. And I'd imagine he'd spent most of his life scared shitless. And it was why he was always acting out and getting into trouble, both at basic training and in his civilian life before. He wanted to make sure to be seen as a hard ass. No one would see what he really was, a scared little chicken shit. "Calm down, Lopez," I said. "We're not here to rough you up, like Drill Sergeant, name omitted, told us to." "He what, brah?" Lopez said, his voice sounding as if betrayal was not new to him, but as if he hadn't expected it here, in this man's army. "You're going to get someone killed in Iraq or Afghanistan," Bird said, "unless you change." "And we're going to change you," Specialist Fowler said, stepping forward and getting right in Private Lopez's personal space. Fowler was from Texas, and though he didn't look like he was always pissed off like Specialist Bird, he was always pissed off. By the way, dear reader, if you've noted the difference in rank, us old guys being specialists, this was not because of our ages. This was because we all had college degrees. Therefore, when we enlisted, we were automatically given the rank of E4, specialist, rather than starting out as privates. We could have gone to OCS, Officer Candidate School, and been officers, but none of us cared about rank and status. We cared about being boots on the ground and getting over there to the Middle East and letting those bastard terrorists know how we felt about them. "Note how the back of your head fits perfectly in the palm of my hand," Specialist Fowler said, and he did that as he did it. Now walking up behind Lopez and putting the palm of his hand on the back of his head. "You see how that's a perfect fit?" "Yeah, brah," Lopez said. Whack! Specialist Fowler hauled off and smacked Private Lopez on the back of the head as hard as he could. "Oh, shit, brah," Lopez said, grabbing the back of his head. "What was that for, brah?" "A sign of things to come," Bird said, walking over to Lopez and doing the same thing Fowler had done. "Damn, brah, stop that shit, brah," Lopez said, backing out of our circle that we'd formed around him. "We're not going to smack you all night," I told Lopez, "but starting tomorrow, you will have no downtime. When given what short breaks we're given, and it wasn't many, one of us is going to pull you off to the side, and we're going to instruct you on all the shit you keep fucking up. Consider it extra credit," Specialist Branson, another old guy in our group, said. Branson was a 25-year-old black man from Alabama. He was calm, cool, and collected, and the size of a mountain. Branson stood at 6'3", and he was a solid 210 pounds. He looked like a heavyweight boxer. He was quiet for the most part, but when he spoke, everybody listened because he did not mince meaningless words. He was wise beyond his years, and he would be the only one among us who would go on to join the Special Forces and pass selection and become a U.S. Army Green Beret. He would serve in Afghanistan in that capacity a few years after basic training. "But this is absolutely your last chance," I told Lopez. "You either start taking this shit seriously or we're going to fuck you up and you're not going to like it." And this is how we handled Private Lopez for the rest of the cycle. Anytime we had any downtime, mostly only given because we were in Georgia and it was in the middle of summer and the temperatures were reaching more than 100 degrees on many days, one of the 6 of us would take Lopez aside and work with him on his extra credit work. By the end of the cycle, Private Lopez had not only become the most improved soldier in our platoon, he'd become one of the best. He'd actually gotten in great shape and found the inner athlete inside him that he never knew was there. His drill and ceremony, which isn't so important at a time of war, was spot on. He showed respect to his superiors and his peers, and you would have never imagined he'd been such a shitbag earlier in the cycle. As happy as we were to see these changes in Private Lopez, it is what he told us old guys, who weren't really old, and who'd molded him like a piece of clay after our graduation ceremony that made us shed tears. "You guys have no idea how much you helped me," he said, holding back his own tears. "You saved my life, and I'm not talking about what might happen in the Middle East." Private Lopez went on to tell us about his home life. He was the youngest of 6 children, all boys, and all 5 of his older brothers were in prison. 2 for drugs, 1 for using and 1 for dealing, 1 for armed robbery, 1 for rape, and 1 for murder. "I was already following our family tradition," Lopez said. "I was actually given an ultimatum by a judge. I'd stolen a car and I could either go to war or go to jail. You guys didn't just turn me into a soldier, you turned me into a man. I'm going to do 20 years in this man's army, and I'm going to retire with a pension and rank and respect, and I'm going to have my own family someday, and I'm going to raise real men, not criminals. Private Lopez, I hope you went out there and bought dirt." Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. There for a minute, I forgot the end of the story. I would spend the next 6 weeks with Private Lopez in Advanced Infantry Training School, and then another 3 weeks with him in Airborne School. Airborne School would be the last time I would see him, until 2 years later in Iraq. I'd been in Iraq with my unit for almost a year. We were being replaced by another unit, and we'd be going home in a matter of only weeks. And who would be part of that replacement unit other than Private Lopez? However, Private Lopez was no longer an E1 private. He was now an E3 private first class. Having been promoted twice in rank, he was well on his way to being promoted to specialist. "Holy shit, brah," I heard a familiar voice from behind me in the motor pool one evening before heading out on mission. I'd been tasked to do a ride-along. This is where those of us who were on our way out of country, military term meaning leaving the combat zone, rode along in the gun trucks and helped train those who were new in country, troops just arriving to the combat zone, and who were replacing us. I turned, and there stood none other than now Private First Class Lopez. "Holy shit, man," I said, and we ran to each other and embraced in a hug. "Are you the training gunner?" Lopez asked. "Yeah, man," I said. "What are you?" I asked, inquiring about his position. Each truck had 3 positions: the driver, the truck commander, who rode shotgun and called all the shots, and who was usually the highest ranking, usually a sergeant, and the gunner, who was up on the gun in the turret. "I'm the gunner," he said. We ordinarily rolled out of the gate in an MRAP, or an up-armored Humvee, but this night we'd actually be rolling out in a personnel carrier which could, and which would, on this night be carrying half a dozen guys and girls along for the ride in the back. You see, here's a part of the military / deployment / leaving the green zone for a mission story that the majority of officers never want measly little enlisted men like me telling, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Only 40% of military personnel ever deploy to combat, and this is during a time of war. The other 60% weasel their way into stateside positions, while the same 40% deploy over and over and over again. Now, once deployed, only 3% of those deployed ever leave the green zone and go outside the gate on any sort of combat mission. The other 97% stay within the walls of the green zone. And I do not for a minute want to take anything away from those folks. They are needed, and they go for a year away from their families as well, and many of them get injured or killed by way of mortar and rocket attacks, SVBIDs, suicide vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, that make their way through the gates, and even in training exercises on the green zone. The green zone is not a safe zone. There is no safe zone in a combat zone, period. But here's the part they don't want known. Many higher-ranking officers who never leave the green zone, as in most of them, wait until their unit is within weeks of going home, and then they request to be put on a mission outside the gate, so that when they go home, they can spend the rest of their lives telling everyone that they left the green zone while they were deployed if asked. Technically, they're not lying at all, but they conveniently make sure to leave out all the specifics, like how it was only once, and of how they rode along as passengers, and of how they may or may not have pissed their pants while doing so. Yes, a certain unnamed captain from my unit pissed his pants while on mission when he thought we were going to get stuck outside the gate after the sun had come up the next morning, therefore making us easier targets for the enemy. Since I was the veteran gunner by this point, upon direct orders by all these brass in the back, I actually manned the gun until we got through the gates and out of the city proper. Private First Class Lopez rode in the assistant gunner's seat beside me, and I talked him through everything I was doing. I made sure to point out areas where we'd been shot at by snipers in the past and the various places where the enemy, for some reason or another, loved to hide IEDs. After we were out of the city and in the middle of the desert, we were given the okay by the brass, who'd finally started breathing again, to change positions. I climbed down out of the turret and into the back of the personnel carrier, and Private First Class Lopez climbed into the turret. Boy, was I thanking my lucky stars that my fellow old guys and myself had worked with this young man to the degree we had back in basic training. I could not have felt more secure with anyone sitting up there in that gunner's turret than Private First Class Lopez. And then the shit hit the fan. We rolled over top of an IED, and not one of the toe poppers we'd been used to, where a side mirror might get blown off the truck, but a monstrous 2,000-pound beast that had been buried just beneath the road surface. The enemy knew we were leaving the country, and they were trying to make sure that a few less of us would go on to make it home. The truck flipped on its side and total chaos ensued. All I could hear was ringing as my eardrums were shattered, but I could tell everyone in the back was screaming as they lay piled on top of each other like a pile-on after a tackle in a football game, by the way their mouths were moving. Things were happening in slow motion and fast forward all at the same time. I know that sounds contradictory, an oxymoron as we writers call it, but I can think of no other way to describe the chaos. It was like watching a movie and fast forwarding for a couple of seconds, then playing the film in slow-mo for a few seconds, and then repeating the cycle. Suddenly, the rear of the personnel carrier opened. The driver had somehow made it out of the truck and had gone around and opened the back hatch. He was waving us out, and slowly, all of the officers began to unclusterfuck themselves and crawl out of the back. I followed, and I was the last man out. We'd been trained well at what to do in this situation, battle-hardened enlisted men who left the gate every night and high-ranking officers who never had until now alike. Though we were all banged up and bleeding and could hear nothing but piercing ringing, we set up a 360-degree security perimeter around the truck, which I could now see was definitely on its side and on fire. Our circle was set up 30 feet away from the truck, just like we'd trained for it to be, and we were all on one knee, our rifles drawn before us, our heads on a swivel, looking for any approaching enemies. And then the shit hit the fan again. The enemy had set up a daisy chain of IEDs at the exact distance from the truck where we'd set up our perimeter. I didn't even hear the blast. What happened next, I have reconstructed in my mind over and over for years, and the picture show I see in my mind each time is always the same. I remember coming to only briefly and looking up into the starry desert sky. There was no moon. I'd never seen as many stars in my life, and I could hear them. Pop, 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 pop. My head rolled to one side, and I saw that I was not hearing stars. Somehow my sense of hearing had come back to me just a little, and I was hearing the double tapping coming from AK-47s, held and fired by half a dozen jihadists coming straight at us, double tapping all the fallen American soldiers lying on the ground. I remember laying there, regretting not having written the letters that one of my battle buddies would go on to give my loved ones after I died. I had refused to write the letters because I viewed doing so as admitting my death was an option, and I'd never viewed it as being so. Oh, all the things I wanted to say, but I had no pen, I had no paper, I had no time. Other than my neck and head, I couldn't move a muscle in my body. Pop, 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 pop. The sounds were closer, and I watched as the first jihadist got close enough for me to actually make out his face. Pop, pop. He double-tapped one of the officers, shooting him through his raised hand and his face behind it. Pop, pop. I didn't see who had been double-tapped next. I'd rolled my head to the other side where I could see nothing but desert on the other side of the carnage so that I wouldn't have to watch. And I patiently waited my turn. When all of a sudden, thud, 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 thud. These blasts were stronger, more powerful. I could feel their concussion. The thud, 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 thud had replaced the pop, pop. I rolled my head again, and I saw, somehow, positioned on his belly inside the gunner's turret, Private Lopez, and he was firing away at the enemy with anything and everything he had left. He had never exited the truck. As trained to do, he'd remained on the gun. Thud, 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 rang the 50 cal, and I saw Lopez drop 2 terrorists. There were already 2 on the ground from where he'd already fired, and after he'd killed the 4th, the 5th that was with them started running away, but Lopez took his head off with that 50 cal before he could make it even another 5 yards, and then I passed out. I would spend 6 months in the Warriors in Transition Battalion at Fort Lewis after my deployment. I had surgery, went through physical therapy, and frankly believed I was ready for release, but they would not let me go. They kept me there for psychological reasons. Yeah, I guess you could say they thought I was crazy. Crazy Lake. What a moniker. And the reason why is because no matter how many times I was asked to recall the story of the events that took place that night in the desert just outside of Mosul, my story never changed. The problem was, according to them, there was no way my story was possible. I remember the day it was finally decided that I would be released. It was under special conditions and only if I were willing to join a special unit and do what was asked of me for the remaining 2 years of my contract. Can we go over this again, Specialist? Yet another mid-level officer asked me in his office that day. We weren't alone, though. We were being joined by a sergeant major, who I will never name, not out of my fear of being disappeared, but because I can't. Though his uniform was standard Army issue, he did not then, nor did he ever, while I knew him, wear his name tag on his uniform. He sat in the meeting that day and listened to my story, the one I've already told you above, not saying a word until the very end, and even then he only spoke 2 words. And you continued to insist, Specialist, the mid-level officer said, that this is exactly how the events went down that night. Yes, sir, I said. I'd been there so long and I wanted out so badly I was damn near willing to lie just in order to be released. But fortunately, with what came next, I wouldn't have to lie. I would be released despite sticking to my truth. Well, sorta. Because like I said, I was only released from the medical holdover unit and into the nameless master sergeant's unit. Specialist, the mid-level officer said, you are still willing to stick to this story, even though you have been in full possession of the knowledge for months now that Private First Class Lopez did indeed not survive the initial IED blast that hit your truck on the night of the attack, having been killed instantly as a result of the force from the blast. And you further understand, Specialist, that Private First Class Lopez's head was completely crushed when the truck flipped. You understand, Specialist, there's absolutely no way possible that Private First Class Lopez could have done that which you have repeatedly claimed he did. Yes, sir, I said. That is correct. I've told you repeatedly exactly what I saw, and I'm sticking to my story because it is the truth. The mid-level officer looked at the master sergeant with no name, rolled his eyes, and shrugged his shoulders and said, you can have him if you want him. The nameless master sergeant looked at me and said, follow me. Lead the way, Master Sergeant, lead the way, I said, an old throwback to our infantry motto, follow me. We left the officer's office and walked down a long hall, and I remember thinking, what the actual fuck, when the Master Sergeant stopped in front of the janitor's closet. He looked around to make sure no one was looking and then punched in a secret code so fast I couldn't tell what numbers he'd hit. I also remember thinking, why is there a lock with a code on the janitor's closet? He opened the door and said, please, and held out a hand motioning me into the closet. I walked slowly around the door so that I could look in, and this is when I realized that this was no janitor's closet at all, despite even the plate on the door I'd seen while making my way around the door stating that it was. The door led to another hallway. I entered the closet that wasn't a closet and instinctively walked down the hall. We came to the end, and at the end there were 3 more doors, one in the center, one on the right, and one on the left. I saw a soldier standing there, and this soldier did wear a name tag. It said Johnson. Johnson, a private, was a black man, about 20 years old, and he stood at parade rest. Private Johnson, the master sergeant said, will you point out which door the specialist needs to enter? Private Johnson pointed to the door in the center, and then he stepped aside so we could pass. I walked to the door, twisted the knob, and opened it. I stepped inside, and then I stopped, holding the door for the master sergeant. Well, the master sergeant said, stepping through the door, you've passed your first qualifying test. I looked into the hall to see if Private Johnson would be joining us. He wasn't there, and I had not seen or heard him open or close either of the other 2 doors. He was simply there one moment, and then he was gone. Have a seat, Specialist, I heard the master sergeant say. I turned around and saw that he was already sitting at his desk in this small, almost completely bare office. I looked at his desk and there was a nameplate on his desk. But even this nameplate didn't have his name on it. It simply had his rank, again, Master Sergeant, and a blank space where his name should have been. And beneath that, as is standard in the Army, the name of his department and his position within the department. Military Paranormal Science Liaison, I said, reading his title aloud. Have a seat, he said, motioning towards the chair on the other side of his desk. We have a lot to talk about. What it is we talked about, I will not say. Where I went and what I did after that meeting while fulfilling out the final 2 years of my contract, I will not say. What I will say is that just as a lot of things we experience in combat never leave us, no matter how long we've been home and no matter how long we've been out of and entirely away from the military, a lot of the things that I experienced while working in my new unit, the Military Paranormal Science Unit, a lot of these things that I experienced while working there have stayed with me as well. And in more ways than you can imagine. I've even given some of them names. And every now and then, more than 10 years out of service as of this writing and this reading, when alone on a backcountry road in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, while either on my mountain bike exercising in the morning or while riding my motorcycle in the afternoon to clear my mind after a long session of writing, I'll not so much see but sense someone pulling up beside me. When this happens, I'll ease out over to the side a bit, not to allow them to pass, but allow them to ride along beside me. For you see, these are the times still when I'm riding with Private Lopez. The end. Again, let's all remember the reason for this day, Memorial Day, to remember the fallen, those like Private Lopez in the story who made the ultimate sacrifice and did not come home. Thank you again to my fellow veterans. Thank you to all those who are actively serving, guardsmen and women, reservists, Coast Guard. I've got some pumpkins to plant. See you for more next time.